Awesome. Thank you all for joining. Let's get this party rolling. Get joining up here. Yeah, awesome. Welcome to Topics on a Friday, and this is our final Purple Madness, which is crazy. It felt like we've been doing this for a while, but only for like 4 weeks. Which I guess in good news, that means we get to move on to more fun things next. I think you're muted, Paul. Let me hip you out. Hope I can't help you.
I'm muted again. All right, there we go. Yeah, we can move on to the from OST debates to EDR debates, and then couple the two together. Because
detection engineering debates is next.
Yes, put that to the forefront.
Oh my gosh. Yes, OST debates. That'll be, well, I mean, we are doing that next month, which is going to be kind of exciting. I guess big announcements is we are at, again, this is our last Purple March Madness. Be sure to like and subscribe. You do get notified, I've noticed, on like LinkedIn, YouTube, and things like that. And then we will have a couple of things to share today, and we'll get that up to our Git afterwards. And we will have a OST charity event sometime next month, which we need to figure out and plan for, which will be super cool. It'll take it from the Twitters to the lives. Otherwise, we can jam.
Let's go in.
Excellent. I am Michael Haig. Probably most everyone should know us by now, but Mike Haig, I'm a threat researcher here at Splunk. My co-host Paul here.
I'm Paul. I'm principal threat hunter at Red Canary, and we have the legend himself today. Nas, would you like to introduce yourself?
A simple introduction would suffice. Nas Bench, threat researcher at Next Run right now. I try to do detection engineering sometimes. That's it.
And our esteemed other co-host, the Goots himself.
Yes.
The legendary Goots.
Legend. Right on. Let's jump
into it. I went ahead and I modified our slide here because I thought it was extremely important that we made it even more our own, right? Like if it's not ours, then we can't really use it. So we're using it.
So maybe this takes us out of that legal issue that we might be having at some point in the future when somebody actually catches these videos.
Yeah. Yes.
Copyright.
Yeah.
Copyright infringement, but no.
Absolutely. So I think for the majority of it here, I think we got you here, the illustrious Nas Bench on Twitter. I think we want to like jump into this report. We have demos, we have conversation, we have a lot going, I think, today. But I think to kind of kick it off, I'll bring up our quick VM demo-y environment, just our doc or our, the same Boot Camp Mandiant report we've been going over. This particular, I remember on Twitter, I think it was a week or two ago, I had made a comment on, I think the Anton one here, where I was like, when I read a report, it's just straight smash and grab, like find what I'm looking for and get out, right? Like words can be for later. And so you agreed with it, which I thought was awesome. And so I guess that's kind of like where I'd like to go first, right? Is when you're reading like these type of reports, these Intel type things and whatnot, how do you process it? What do you do, before you start developing anything, or how do you look at it and think about the different pieces of content or techniques that are being shown? What's your workflow?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I look at these reports almost daily, so it's a bit of a drag. Sometimes I skim through them, sometimes I go into them in more details. But the gist of it is basically the idea of reading a report for me is I need to get some output out of it. Most of my output is either Yara rules or Sigma rules. So I jump in with that mentality in mind. So the first things, I don't like to read it that much, except if I find it interesting. So I really jump into stuff that stands out. So any particular command lines, any interesting screenshot, any interesting obfuscation in the script or whatever. And then I kind of classify like the report into three kinds of detections for me. So either the report is important for me or my customers. So in that sense, I'm more interested in the specific TTPs, in like what exactly is happening, and if it's more a generic like generic technique or whatever, I look for behavioral stuff, something that I can extrapolate. For example, if we read this report, we will see that the attackers used like a compressed file. Inside of it, there is a malicious GS and the JavaScript opened PowerShell and whatever. I tend to look at these behaviors and extract them and divide the detection that I'm going to write at least theorize about into these three categories. Am I writing specific detections for these specific threat actors, which I know are very trivial to bypass, but from like a forensic point of view or like from a repeatable point of view, I would see I will ask myself simple questions like, is this often repeated? Is this a good enough thing that will identify the threat actor? And this will guide me through the general, how do I say, the general flow of how I extract these things. But most of it, I smash and grab, basically. So yeah, that's the best part of it.
Yep. Yeah, I sometimes feel like that too. It's like, okay, yep, it's typical zip.js. Let's move on. Like, what's the new novel piece that I should really worry about here or whatnot? And yeah, I feel bad. Paul, what about you? I know you've mentioned, I think, before, but let's hear it again.
I read the headline, I share it with Mike, and then I wait about 20 minutes, and then Mike gives me the core important pieces. So I really drive on efficiencies in these kinds of things and just wait for the good things that come out. Yes, I do actually read these, but for the most part, usually if I wait 20 minutes, Mike will tell me the good juicy bits, and then I can go like pinpoint specific things that are interesting and kind of skip some of the other things that I may not be interested in. But no, I do actually read these from time to time. Just kind of digging into them. But I mean, there's so many of them, right? Like you look at the different vendors that put them out from different threat reports, and then we're now in the season of yearly threat report, threat detection reports. I think everybody who is in the security space produces one. And so looking at commonalities and variances between what did they see, what did we see, is kind of an interesting take. And then thinking about like the different detection coverage opportunities between some of the overlapping themes that are seen from either threat groups or the techniques that a tool employs to achieve the objective, et cetera. But it's interesting to kind of hear different perspectives of how you can approach it, because I don't think there's one correct way. I think it's just the way that you work to achieve the outcome that you're looking for.
Naz, when you're working on like things like this, do you, especially for like the Yara rules or Sigma, are you tagging like the threat group with any of this as well, and for like notification afterwards or for tracking over time?
Sometimes. It depends on the threat groups, to be honest. Like there are some threat groups that at least we at Nextron are more interested in than the majority of other people, I would say. And the inverse is true for any other company. So it depends on like the flavor of customers you have. And that's where the interest lay most of the time. But oftentimes we don't focus really on specific detections that identify a threat group. What we try to do is extrapolate on a threat and see the genericness out of it. Especially in Yara or in Sigma, maybe not as Sigma as much, since we will talk about it later. But in Yara, for example, what we tend to do is write these kind of suspicious rules that are extrapolated from a specific behavior of things. Like, for example, let's say that this threat actor used a specific obfuscation technique. The idea would be not to only write specific rules to identify this threat, but to extrapolate and see if what else could we do. We put ourselves in the mind of the threat actor and try to find variations. And oftentimes, we're very lucky with VirusTotal. People upload a lot of stuff, so you will find crazy stuff with 0 detections and a lot of crazy obfuscations. And since we tend to focus on more on a forensics analysis point of view, since our products and the tool that we produce are more like not a vulnerability scanner, but more of a here is a malicious things we found, and now you go investigate it, because it's not found by any other tool most of the time. Mm-hmm. So when you approach it from that kind of from that point of view, we tend to eliminate the threat actor from the equation. Like, we say, this is malicious, but how can this be changed by different threat actors to, say, for example, create a new technique or create a new variation, or on those kind of lines. That's how most of the time, most of the discussion in our meetings, or like internally between colleagues, these are the stuff that we discuss most of the time.
That's cool. Yeah, I always love it when I am driving through VirusTotal and I end up finding, different YARGs from you guys over there. It's really neat all the time.
I'm trying to think of the last time I was perusing VirusTotal and didn't see like a Nextron tag of some sort within like a specific thing I was looking into, which is kind of fun to see that. Just had like very wide breadth of capability and detection on some of those. I legit can't think of the last time that I didn't see one from Nextron or the Thor scanner.
When you don't see them, send them my way.
You got it. We'll track it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. And I guess on the Sigma side of things, I'll pull Sigma up, and when you're looking at like this type of threat report, as you're kind of like digging through, is it your gears are you already spinning? You're like, yep, we got coverage for that, or is it just kind of like, oh, I could add that extension to something, and you just kind of ship it out? How's kind of like the mix of the flow of that? When you're looking at any kind of threat report.
Yeah, so basically there is some kind of difficulty in Sigma, and I think in any big rule set. So if you look at Sigma, there is more than 1,000 rules in there. So the challenge becomes, how do you write detection that are not duplicate or full overlaps of other detection? Like, now over months, I kind of got a grasp over the whole rule set. So if you name me anything, I can tell you if we have a rule for it. But on a general sense, what I try to do, for example, since one of the tools that I use internally is Aurora. So since Aurora integrates Sigma as a whole, so I have 2 approaches. There is the approach of writing rules that are able to be expressed in Sigma. And there is the other approach, which is writing rules that are expressed in telemetry form. Even maybe Sigma is not able to do it right now, but I at least try to find the telemetry that like the Aurora, maybe we need this ET, maybe we need that or this. But basically, like that we have, if you look at Sigma, some people may say that the rules are too generic, or the rules are. But the idea behind it is actually make the rules as generic as possible in the threat category, meaning that sometimes you see filter that don't make any sense. But the idea isn't to take any Sigma rule and apply it directly. That's actually a mistake. Like, you need to actually look at every Sigma rule and remove the filters. And we try, sometimes we do a bad job, but sometimes a better job is to improve the false positive section with more information. And since Aurora has coverage, what I try to do, for example, during this report, is to extract these TTPs and transform them into actionable stuff. Like I write a PowerShell script of this specific technique, or I write it in Python, or I do the similar stuff. And in Aurora, for example, we have a trace flag that, according to a configuration file, will monitor every ETW that you specify, and then will output a log. And then from that log, I would see like, okay, I executed this stuff. What do I have? Or what is suspicious in these logs? Or what can I infer from a detection point of view? And there is a line between, do you want to provide a very specific rule that detects this threat, but can be easily bypassable? For example, I give you an example, which is often found in process command line rules, for example. Like you see every flag can be written with a dash, but 99% can be written with a slash. So you see detection like written with dash, but if you use a slash, you bypass them. For example, these kind of stuff, it's, even though process creation can be bypassed, but when I usually write detection for this stuff, I take into consideration that the person behind the scenes that is taking this rule and analyzing it will adapt it to its environment. Because I don't believe that there is like a golden rule in false positive tuning or whatever. I was thinking like of an idea recently. I'm trying to elaborate it. It's like, it's an effort of a community to contribute false positives and then apply them dynamically into endpoints depending on the software that you have. For example, sometimes you have process access rules and you say, if somebody access LSAS, whatever, with this flag, then trigger on it. And then when you start filtering on it, like you filter this app, whatever, and you have 27 filters, but these are not generic to everyone. Like sometimes you have GitHub desktop install and you have Google Chrome, but another person will have Firefox and will have whatever. So trying to find a balance while writing a rule, making it generic and not as specific is key, because one of the things that I don't like is writing rules forever. I really hate this. Like I don't find the idea of writing rules forever interesting. So I like to write rules which detects a specific behavior that I intend to detect. For example, you say you detect PowerShell encoding stuff, so the rule would go in that direction. Doesn't mean necessarily using the encoding flag or using ENC or focusing on base64, but the inspiration is that, and then you are constrained by the telemetry of the specific log source that I target. So say PowerShell doesn't have that field. Well, it doesn't have that field. I can't do anything more than that. But if there are available like sources or whatever, I try to leverage as much sources as I can, and as much being less false positive prone, but I really don't care about the idea that the rule should be triggering for you with 0 false positive. You should do the work. I'm from that mentality. You should do at least some work. Don't get rules for free.
I think it's also tough to, but it's also tough to account for potentially all the different software that may not be default on a system that an organization uses. And if you produce it and then they're like, well, you have much false positives because of this, how do I account for everything that's potentially out there? And so I think, we talk about all the time, like baselining your environment, know what is approved software. Can you enforce what is not approved, right? Can you validate what isn't approved, but you don't have an enforcement? Can you even determine that? And that can help kind of figure that out. But if you don't do that, then no matter what rule you put in or what product you install to tell you about those rules, you're going to get false positives. It's just going to happen.
Yeah, isn't there a way? Isn't whenever a new Sigma rule gets committed, it runs against something in CI or GitHub Actions where it validates the rule or something like that? Is that right?
Yeah. There is a project called EVTX Baseline that we try to. Okay. It's open source. What we try to do is we ran like a typical Windows machine. We installed the most common software, and after execution of a couple of minutes or a couple of hours, we snapshot that, and then we export it and put it into this EVTX, and we do a release. For example, now we have 10 machines that are public, EVTX, and we have internal testing. Like, for example, when you see a Sigma rule gets pushed, like what we do, and this may be a tangent, but I will mention it because I'm a little bit salty about this, but I will mention it. Yeah, but anyway, so what we do, for example, when the CI will run in Sigma, like after the rule gets merged, what happened is it will get for our internal testing stuff. And our internal testing stuff has even more Windows machines, more whatever, more Linux, whatever. And we do tuning based on that. So the status, for example, a lot of people, one thing we're trying to eliminate or reduce is the differentiation between Sigma rules that have status experimental and stable or testing or whatever. You see, for a lot of people pull from Sigma directly. A lot of companies, for example, pull directly from Sigma. But when you pull directly from Sigma, like when a rule is actually pushed into Sigma main repo, it's not actually ready to use immediately in production. It doesn't make sense because sometimes the rule, I created it in my lab, and my lab has 2 machines, 3 machines, 5 machines, whatever. But it's not reflective of reality. So what we do is we put it into different pipelines, and we try to reduce the force of our capability, at least. A lot of people think that we have like infinite resources, but it's not true. Like we have limited resources. I believe every endpoint has tens of thousands of resources more than any testing that we could achieve. But at least what we do is the internal testing, like with the false positive tuning, we contribute it back to the project. Like we don't hold it. So, and this thing is what I get a little bit salty. So if you see how many people are pulling from Sigma and like tuning false positive, but internally only, this is what I get a little bit angry, because a lot of people are pulling and improving the rule maybe internally and not contributing back. So I can't do anything about it, but unfortunately it is what it is. So.
Yeah, there's definitely, obviously, I mean, even with the Splunk security content, right? We don't get the false positive. We've been talking about the same thing about how do we handle false positive testing, and this project has come up a couple times of building something like this, having it cycle through, run the query against it. Because again, a lot of the work we're producing is in a little lab, or we got 5 endpoints, and hopefully something, obviously it's all very much ran in a vacuum, and it's interesting. That's cool. This is an awesome project.
But this project, if people want to contribute, you're more than welcome. We put recently we put up a script. The idea behind the script is to enable the logging for you and to check the loggings if it's enabled. And we put a list of software, and we're trying to improve it a little bit. So the idea is for people, we want to make it like zero friction. You double click something, it install everything, and you give us the log by the end. And the log is like, it's a public contribution. It is automatically released and put into the CI. So I think it's a good idea, but if people want to contribute.
I think we found another collaboration point. I'm taking this back. This is cool.
Really. No, I think it's when you have things like this where you're trying to get collaboration, trying to produce things that make it easier, so that it is easier, because I think people do want to in cases, just not necessarily know how to, or there's maybe some complexity that they're not comfortable with. So just to your point, like a simple click and run, like that makes it very easy that if people are willing to and just collaborate, like that opens so many more doors than just, we have to have 20 different things and go manually do that. Like that could be daunting to some people. So I appreciate the simplistic nature of trying to make it so that anybody can, because it does help, especially if you're using the Sigma rule set.
I'm bad at automation, so bear with me. when I learn stuff correctly, I will apply it correctly.
I mean, honestly, this is a pretty big topic, false positive, and false negative, and detection engineering in general. Like, this is, I think, hard for a lot of organizations to figure out outside of vendors. You know what I mean? Like a standard org, they're just shipping. It fires a bunch of notables or alerts, and now they have to go back and close all of them, and they're probably getting something, a true false positive or true positive in there, but they have to close it because it's just noisy. Like this is definitely, it brings a lot of like the idea of almost like having, I remember at prior org and an MSSP, not Red Canary, but it was, we had like a dev environment mixed with like our prod environment, and it almost had mirrored data. So it was pretty simple to go and test in the mirrored, oh, this might work decent today, but let's go throw it in production as a notable and see what happens. But yeah, it's a definitely a, yeah.
Yeah, it's a difficult topic, and I think there are ways to optimize it, but I think false positive, I have a theory about it. It's not proven or whatever or tested. It's just that thing I've thought about, but I really believe that false positive should be false positive is not unique as people think, and it shouldn't be proprietary or shouldn't be like confidential or whatever, but false positive is as much as a behavior as the technique itself. So I think it should be documented, and people should like talk about it a little bit more. Like if you see, like there is the project which is WTF bins, which tries to do something like that, but I think it's an interesting topic that we should focus a little bit more on, because I really believe that internally a lot of people are doing tons of false positive tuning, but this information is like hoarded internally. It's private information, and people are not willing to share it. And if you take any organization, it's repeatable work. For every organization is doing the same work. It's the same rule: local account creation, tuning it, Kerberos, tuning it, and this tuning, I really believe it's not that unique, and the idea behind the tuning can be shared, and everyone can benefit from it. So maybe one day we find a way to express it in a shareable way. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely tricky. I love too that Aurora itself, we have it in our attack range. I love that it has obviously a GUI, but also it's pulling from different ETW providers. And I noticed like even just messing with some of the things that I made for today and for our demo here in a minute, it just lights up, and it's super cool because it also ships in through, I think, the application Windows event log. And so I get it from like two sides. I get it from our standard Aurora like technology add-on plus the app log. So it just always like mirrors a lot of data, and it's neat. It's a neat product and very helpful, especially for like detection engineering, and you're trying to run different tests, say with the Atomic Red team, and you're watching it happen, or even malware and whatnot. You want to see what lights up and then goes into your SIM or whatever and play with it from there. I like that. It's neat.
And there is a lot of potential in, how do you say, in when you're writing detections, like don't take it as a detection product. Take it more of a, like you could use it as that, and it requires some tuning. But one interesting thing from a detection engineering perspective is you could enable it, go to the configuration settings and enable the specific ETW that you want, and you could write immediate Sigma rules on them, or you could receive logging from them. It's like an ETW client on the fly with a simple like configuration file. You write the specific ETW and the specific keywords that you want to monitor, and it's done. Yeah, so I think it's useful.
Yep. This is sponsored by Nextron Systems.
No. It's the free version. The free version. I use it regardless of Nextron or not, but because I
Totally.
had
It's
a
great.
project. I had a project which is EVTX ETW, which is a Python script that collects ETW, and ETW has a lot of interesting things, and there isn't a lot of, how do you say, software that lets you tap into it freely. So that's the whole idea behind it. Nothing else.
Yes, totally. Yeah. I do forget the fact that it is free. There's that free version of it, which is totally great. But yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, I have some.
One thing we
go ahead, Paul.
might have forgot to do at the beginning, which is like, what is a high-level explanation of Sigma? We don't have to go into the nitty-gritty, just like we talk about it and it's a great resource, but like for people who may not know what it is, like what is it and what do I do with it?
So, okay, I will give you the overview version. So basically, Sigma is a standard. So a standard where you can express your detection in whatever format, in a specific format, not whatever format, in a specific format, which has a specification which is very loose, meaning that you can add fields, you can add whatever you like, and this is the language itself. And in Sigma, from the language, they derives the rules that you see in this main project. And there is the Sigma like engine or backends, which are responsible for converting these rules. So these are two things. You could write your Sigma rules however you like. And the backends basically like are publicly contributed. You could contribute your own backend and you could write it. It's the core language is written in Python, so it's easily extensible. And the idea is your rule, you write it in YAML, you follow a certain specification, and then you write your backend to reflect your actual EDR backend or CM backend or whatever. So let's say, I don't know, you have a specific query that says process, like command line should be translated to process command line. So the idea is you write a specific configuration file where you map these detections to whatever. And it's not limited to what is currently available. It's like limitless. If you have any capability provided by your EDR, you could express it by like extending a Python class and writing the like mimicking the code. That's it. So if like there are two projects. This is Sigma, the main rule base, and if you go to PySigma, it is like the core language where you can take clone it and start developing your own backend. And they are already available. Like if you scroll down, there is like a list of a table of the available backends. There is a Splunk backend, and there is Microsoft Defender, Azure, whatever. And a lot of people, like, if you want to contribute. If you want to make it private, make it private. A lot of people what they're doing, my experience, is they take the EDR and they take the capabilities they want and implement them in this backend. And then they will write their detection with additional fields and additional correlation or whatever, and then just convert them using Sigma CLI or whatever. So basically, it's a specification that lets you express your detection rule or logging rule. The specification is loose, as I said, and you can write backend or whatever. So that's basically what it is. The idea behind it is you express your detection in a platform agnostic way. So if you have more than, I don't know, you have two EDRs with two different completely languages, instead of writing the detection 2 times, maybe you could write it a single time in YAML and then convert it however you like. Yeah, that's the gist of it.
Yeah, right on. Appreciate the context. Like I'm familiar with it, but I think it's always good to get a review for people who may not be familiar or understand like that this thing even existed, because I think it's a very interesting thing, especially when you're talking about writing simplistic form in YAML and then putting it out into an output like an Elastic or Splunk or some other format, and then kind of tuning it and being able to just kind of use that as your base to then go start something else. I think it's a very neat tool and project to support that efficiency in developing rule sets. So many things.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot here. I know. Yeah. Oh, here's the whole graphic. That's what we needed.
The pipeline.
This is great. Yes. That is cool.
That's for the PowerPoints. If you want to do a PowerPoint.
Yeah. More hoodies, less PowerPoint.
Right. But I think we have demo. Did we reach the demo point? We ran malware.
I think so. Run some mals. Yeah, I have some cool stuff I made. Let's see. Yeah, so I wrote 4 things this past week. So I guess like the disclaimer, that's the right word, disclaimer, is that this is for the blue team only. Educational purposes, just for the blue team. Like red team, like You're gonna have to wait till we release a new one for you. And so we'll get these out to the repo. But I basically just kind of took what we saw in the report, and I was just like, "Yo, Mandiant report, like let's put these pieces down as a JS." And if you remember from probably earlier in the month sometime, we broke down, there's, it talks about 2 different like attack chains in here, maybe 3. There's so much going on. There's 2. And so I took that and I got it written out as, first I made a JS, and then I made a couple other Python pieces here. Basically just uses kind of like the standard stuff. This will match and or mimic what we saw in the report, which is, the registry piece being written by WScript. So a random string using the username and like with a 0 at the end, and then it'll create a key.
By the way, one thing I wanna just note is for everyone.
Oh, Nas cut out.
Internet.
Oh, no.
Hello.
There he is. He's back.
There we go.
You're back. Go ahead. We got you. We hear you, Nas. You're live. Oh.
We lost him.
Test. Sorry, my internet.
There he is. You're back. You're good. He's still there?
Can you hear me?
This is the news. We hear you.
But I can't hear you.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay.
Okay. So what I said is, for this kind of stuff in report, please. Sometimes I don't know if it's dynamic stuff or actually the string. For example, the %% username, you can write a string like that.
Yep, that's true.
Let's make it clear, especially in screenshots, when you use screenshots.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I didn't even think about that. It's a good point. I think I forget.
Yeah.
Now I wonder how many times I was like, oh yeah, that's just an environment variable, call it a day. When in reality, it could have actually just been a pure string literal. So I gotta go back and make some notes somewhere. Again, might have messed some stuff up.
I'm sure if Harrison was here, he would tell us the whole CTI process of how he validates whether it was the variable or not.
It's true.
Because he reads the
when we need him.
Or Tony. We can bring back Tony. This is the final episode. Bring him back.
Do whatever he wants. The Wild West here.
Yes, this is it. So yeah, I did take the environment variable piece, use that. And so this is mixed with kind of both of them, where it will write a file to disk, it inflates it with like a simple string in there. And it just kind of goes down the list, writes the registry keys, writes the file to disk. It will have a little thing that pops up that says hello world, things like that. So it's it does it pretty much follows the report, kind of moving quick, I guess, because we are hitting time. It will write a base 64 encoded content piece into the registry, into the value. It just runs get hostname, and it will run that. It converts the .log to .js, runs that. That's the hello world piece. And then if you read the report, it calls out the fact that it reaches out to 3 hard-coded domains. And so I tossed in 3 hard-coded domains. And you can change all this, obviously. And then it'll create a scheduled task as well. And then, yeah, I'll showcase this first. Sorry, me playing with it. But yeah, the first one, obviously, just using WScript. I'm going to kick off that. I have a prompting here because it's nice to see what it's doing, and you can see the randomly generated paths. It goes through, creates your registry stuff, encoded things, creates your scheduled task, and it's going to start hitting those 3 domains. There's the .log change to .js and running it. And if you're wondering where the other two domains are, well, Microsoft and Google have a little bit more code on their site, so it takes a little bit longer to hit them and pull it back. So I either just kill it or, yeah, there it is. Wow, thanks. And that one, whatever that was, failed. If you happen to notice down here in the bottom, I have a bunch of Aurora thingies triggering. And I think I just refreshed this page and yeah, here we go. So earlier it was showing your name everywhere. Now I was like, yeah, here you are. Oh, that's something else, I think. But still, you're there in spirit.
Frack is getting a lot of love on this test.
Yep. Let's refresh again. No. But yeah. But this is neat. I really like that it actually shows all this. This is powerful. And then obviously you get your command line. This is the scheduled task being obviously added using PowerShell. I think that's from the report. It does have obviously a cool task name. And if you go to our task scheduler, refresh it, the Goots was here. Maybe that's why it failed, because it was already there. And here's your PowerShell. And it'll start, I think, upon log on. That's its whole deal. So yeah. Action. Yeah. So yeah, thought that was cool. And then yeah, let me show the other scripts here. Kind of the same thing, just using PowerShell this time. And it's just basically using PowerShell to create the randomly generated string within the path, and using the username environment variable, and it just goes through the same thing. It'll take a binary this time, and it will encode it and drop it into the registry, and then it will start it. It'll start the base64 at the end. And this is the Goots in your Hive. Kick that one off, and it gets a little quiet because it's obviously encoding a file and dumping it into the registry, and then it's going to reload it back up. Now, Aurora down here will start to say, hey, somebody was playing with Mimikatz, and it'll generate a couple little things in here as well, which is pretty cool. And then, yeah, I think this is one of them that was popping up earlier. Yeah, here it is, Mimikatz. Oh, hey, there's Mimikatz. It's fast. This is probably the most fluid live demo. I know. Yeah. It even says educational purposes only right in there for us too. Yeah.
Blue teams only.
Yeah. Yes. We're going to make this club exclusive.
So there's overlap in some of the function, or like the procedural aspect, between the JS script and the PowerShell variation. What's the benefit of testing against both versus relying on one or the other?
Yeah, I mean, another thing I was thinking too was, why not just get the sample itself and run the malware, right? I think the reason why I chose this route was for control, and the sites are, obviously I can code it to hit example.com, and I don't have to rely on downed sites of the Goots and whatnot. So I think to me, it was just mostly having control, knowing what it's doing, but also mimicking the same behaviors of the report. I think there's obviously value in both sides. Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I was unclear. So it seems that the JS and the PowerShell have very similar functionality of what those two are doing between your two tests.
Oh, yes.
So testing the two variations, what's the benefit in that? Why wouldn't I just want to say, well, the JS is the one from kind of like the threat report. Why wouldn't I would just test that and call it a day? What's my benefit between the two?
I think it was because for this particular demo, or for these two scripts, in the report, he calls out, or they call out using they place a .NET binary in the registry. So it was mostly just doing that. So I just happened to have Mimikatz on disk, and it was easy to say use PowerShell to load that up, throw it in there.
Doesn't have Mimikatz just stored on their desktop.
Yeah.
Internal security is going to be hitting my desktop here any minute.
Blue team only. So
That's right.
But I guess the other main reason why was probably because I was able to put the PowerShell script quickly to encode a binary, where I would have probably had to spend more time figuring that out in JS and how to do it, other than calling PowerShell to do it, right? But yeah, that's probably it.
So think like maybe I think goes back to, at least I think testing multiple ways that your detectors work. Because I think if we looked at the two, I'm sure there's actually Sigma rules that triggered on one and not the other. And I'm sure there's also overlap between the two that kind of gives you the coverage. So I think that it's good to have variations so that you can kind of validate where your overlaps are in that aspect, which I think a lot of people just go, well, this is what the threat did. I should focus on what the threat did versus to Naz's point earlier, making it generic enough that it's going to potentially cover more than just that particular single thing that was done in that single campaign potentially, which I like.
Yeah.
That's my approach here. I think about it with rule sets at least.
This rule I saw firing earlier, and at first it didn't click as to why, but the PowerShell script itself outputs as a randomly generated file name. And so this is actually Mimikatz, obviously, based on the company info here. But yeah, that's super slick. And that's a really interesting detection engineering type thing, as you're kind of just mentioning here, Paul, is you may want to have multiple ways to detect Mimikatz, right? I think we see a lot of content written for like original file name, looking at different binary metadata pieces. And like this would be a great example of that. If you're just looking for mimikatz.exe as process name, obviously this is not mimikatz.exe. You would need to look at other variables here.
Yeah, but one thing I would say is interesting when writing detection is you should know the limitation of the telemetry that you are writing it for. For example, like if we had the capability of, for example, getting API level information or something a little bit higher than that, like would it make sense to test via different tooling? The answer would be sometimes no, and most often no, because the different tooling are interesting if you're writing at a certain level, which is like process creation, for example. Like at that level, maybe tooling makes a difference. But this approach to knowing where your detection can be bypassed and be triggered, I think it's key when writing rules. Like we should write rules with intent. Like if your intention is to detect process creation, that's fine, but the intention should always be clear in the detection itself. Like if you say, for example, this specific detection of short name path in command line, the idea behind it has nothing to do with any threat actor. The idea behind it is like one time we remembered that, oh, you can actually like write these, and these invalidated a whole subsection of detection based on full paths. Because if a path had a space, then or duplicates, you could write it in short names form, or like, and that would invalidate your detection. So thinking in this manner, like you say, okay, what are the limitations or what are the possible ways of my telemetry that it can be, tricked, or somebody can trick me? I think will create interesting variation that sometimes aren't reported for threat reports, but will help you catch something inadvertently, like by accident. Like you put tripwires. I agree that some of them are false positive prone, but I think we should sometimes accept that if we want to find interesting stuff, at least as hunting rules, not as much as detection rules. But yeah, having that distinction brought up is I think is key when you're writing detection, because there is no wrong telemetry. There are only wrong focus. If you focus on a single telemetry, you're wrong. but if you focus multitude and you write multiple rules with different aspects and different intention, I think that's fine. And that always it should be the key. That's what I think. Yeah.
I like that thought process, especially that there's no like wrong source. There's just potentially a better source, because everything is logged and could be useful, but it needs the right context. I think is important, right? Like Microsoft's operational VHDMP log source. Like, am I going to use that for process creates? No, but is it good for virtual hard disks like ISO files, the very common access vector these days? 1,000%. And it's, while it's somewhat limited in some capacity, it's still extremely viable to determine, was it mounted? Was it unmounted? What was the path to it? So I know where that file exists. So if I'm trying to remediate it and the thing is still mounted and I'm trying to remove the thing, like delete the file, well, I can't do it, but I can go look at the log and say, well, it's still mounted, so I need to unmount it. Then I can delete the file. So there's obviously instances that not just span hunting or detection engineering, but also response. What are those sources I could use that can augment whatever the thing is that I'm looking for, trying to accomplish?
Yeah. Yep.
Yes, that is awesome. So do we want to keep it under an hour, or do we want to keep jamming?
Yeah, just kind of like figure it out.
All right.
Yeah,
I just had some staged, like, simple Splunkness here. Just basically calling out the WScript, hitting example.com, just using I think this is the DNS query piece DNS event from Sysmon event code 22. And it's just showing, WScript making a netcon. Obviously just one of them. There's 3. And then the other one was, I don't know if we ran this 15 minutes ago or not anymore, but something I loved hunting for this, because I always think like JScript, CScript, DLL, or any kind of DLL load is very interesting, like especially coming from like a non-standard process that, like MSHTA loading JScript DLL, like what is it doing? Or even AMZ being loaded into some other process, like that's not typically, managed or used within AMZ outside of like PowerShell and WMI and things like that. So I thought that was kind of cool. Obviously, it's not that exciting, being it's just obviously WScript loading it, but not super sexy, but it's just an image load. And then the last one I had was the scheduled task creations. I think we ran 2 or 3 of them. I can't remember now, but it just shows it being added via the scheduled task exe. And then you'll see the PowerShell that will be scheduled to run. And obviously every other little bits, things like that upon logon, or at least this one.
Yeah. And one other thing I remember right now is one approach I like, or I love to do sometimes when writing detections for process creation specifically, is taking this and creating variations on it. For example, one thing I recently discovered is that when you specify the user of a scheduled task, for example, it's not necessarily anti-authority system. You could specify variations of anti-authority system, and it's still valid as system. So if you say, for example, anti-authority in your detection, and somebody uses system directly, it still will be run as anti-authority. And if you Google it, it's not documented, but if you try it, it works. So it's always, I think, one thing to take from these reports is to not take it as a standalone report, but take it as a jumping off point of ideas that the threat actors might take to develop further detections. And one other aspect is also important, is to not limit yourself by the number of sources that you know. The reason I mentioned Aurora ETW is because there are a ton of ETW providers that sometimes generate stuff that are unrelated to the stuff that you're searching for. but only happens when that specific action happens. So sometimes you could create correlation between events that you could have you couldn't think of inadvertently, but it exists. And the ability to like ingest log and analyze that. I know not everyone has the time to do that, except if you're a detection engineer. But if you are, it's a really interesting approach to look at report, because I think like reading the report and covering the report and that's it, I think it's a boring way. There is more an interesting way, which is to extrapolate and think, if I was the threat actor, how would I change without changing completely? Like, how would I create slight variations of known techniques? I think it's interesting, and oftentimes you find stuff that is missing, or you learn stuff along the way. So that's a tip I usually use. So maybe it's useful to whoever is listening.
It's a super valid point, right? Like, think if you write your rule too narrow focused, what is the one thing that could get changed to now that rule is completely invalidated, right? It's bypassed, right? To that point of, if I write it for NT authority, but they use system, that rule's not going to trigger potentially. So I think it's a good aspect and thing to think of. Is it too focused? Is it too specific, or is it too broad even at times? And find that happy medium. But you have to test. But then you also have to know how to test it, right? Like, what should I test? So I think that's a balance of using things like Atomic Red Team and mimicking things that you see in like reports or other tool sets that can help kind of with that variation of, if I expect this thing to fire, how do I validate that it does? It's an interesting problem, and how do you solve it? Who knows? Go figure it out, because everybody's process and methodology is going to be different, but who cares if it drives results, right? I think that's the big thing that a lot of people get hung up on is, oh, well, you got to do it this way because of this thing or this factor. Well, who really cares? You didn't have a detection before. Now you do. Now you have the chance of actually catching something. Congrats. You made yourself better. And I think that sometimes gets overshadowed a lot, is that like, oh, it's brittle, it's bypassable. Well, everything's bypassable given enough time and resources. What I'm trying to do is get those quick wins. Yep. Like, who cares? And if I catch more than just the specific thing, like, that's an even better rule set. Something I see all the time, and I'm like, you know, if you didn't have it before and you have it now, it's better. Congrats. Like, you've moved the needle. Like be proud of that and just keep going. Don't stop. just move the ball.
Yeah.
That's all.
100%.
Yeah, I always think, especially for like scheduled tasks, like you can update the task, you can, make them hidden and things like that. So it's having at least something looking for, like in this particular example, like, oh, tasks are being created. And then as you realize how voluminous a task is being created, you start to narrow it down. Like, okay, like task being created from, like in this, app data roaming. You might never see that, but hey, you got something, right? Or in some kind of world writable paths, or what's kind of common based on threat reports. And you start building out these little rules and they get better and better. And yeah, but yeah, that's,
yeah.
I guess that's kind of
one thing for bypass, I would say, is one more thing, if I may. One more thing regarding bypass is we shouldn't get hang on bypass of a technique via a superior technique. Like, for example, you could bypass process creation but not using a specific API call, for example. But there are like sub-levels of bypass that are interesting, which I think gets overlooked by the idea that everything is bypassable, so I shouldn't write a detection for it in the first place, which I think is wrong. You should write a detection, and you should think of bypasses of detection. For example, like when you say people write detection for W script, and you could change the name of W script, and you can modify the original file name, of course. But you are not writing bypass variations of bypasses of those types of bypass. You're writing bypasses of typical actions that gets overlooked. Like, I think this distinction is really important, and it doesn't matter if a detection gets bypassed. It matters if a detection is not detecting what you intend. That's what's important. Because if you bypass a detection because you're detecting mimikatz, and your detection is detecting mimikatz via process creation, well, that's okay, because your intention was detecting mimikatz via process creation. And intention is more important than anything else. Yeah. That's
really
it. Sorry.
No,
that was good.
I think that's probably like one of the most like huge takeaway, right? Is the intent aspect of that. I intended for this detector to do X, Y, and Z. Cool. It did X, Y, and Z, but because the adversary did something different, like, okay, now I go create a new detection. Or along the way, another detection triggered because of that technique they did. Each time they do something, that's an opportunity for detection, right? So even if it bypasses it, congrats, you have probably 20 more steps, and hopefully along the 20 more steps, there's landmines for you along the way to get caught. Like that's obviously the goal. But if there's only like a single detection, you bypass it. Well, now what? Like you only had one and it's gone, or evaded, bypass, evaded, whatever term is probably more suiting for kind of the intent. But yeah,
yeah,
that's really, really good perspective.
I was waiting
for sharing.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. Intent.
Goots. I just love that picture. Somebody's got to get this on like a shirt. You gotta find the original author, get the approval, go from there. But, all right, what's next?
Yes.
We got, I think just wrap, right?
Yeah, I feel like we went through quite a bit today.
Oh yeah.
I can't think of something that's like standing out that we totally missed other than more goots, but yeah. Yeah, I can't believe this is the last one, and yeah, it's crazy the amount of content that we've gone through at this point.
I think the coolest part of this whole process was the different perspectives and like key points that come out of it from everybody's background. Like it's just, I learned a lot of like different takeaways from each perspective that I may not be a DE, but I can apply some of those concepts or CTI, right? Like I think that's probably like the coolest thing, at least from my perspective, and hopefully others picked up things along the way. So grateful for all of our guests like you, Nas, coming on and sharing your perspectives and thought process. Super, super cool to hopefully help people out.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. No worries.
Yeah, it's very, very powerful for sure. It's great. It's back. It's weird to wrap this up because it's been obviously 4 weeks of this, but thank you so much, Nas, for coming in and really helping out, and everybody obviously who has joined, Harrison and Anton. Feedback has been great, so we really appreciate it, and gosh, it's crazy.
Yeah, thanks for setting this up, by the way. This is an amazing series, and I really like the idea behind multiple perspective. Yeah, maybe we should even get a red team and say, hey, this is bad OPSEC. The whole episode is bad OPSEC.
I think there are a plethora of people who are very fitting to that, and definitely do. That was actually one thing we did toy around with, is like the red team perspective of kind of how their thought process and approach to certain things, and kind of bridging that gap. So you are spot on. It is funny though, there are 4 instances of Goots throughout the slide deck today, and it's our 4th one of the series, so I think it was very very fitting.
Yeah.
Subliminal messaging of Goots 4 times.
The Goots religion, it's starting today.
Oh my gosh.
So CISA released a tool yesterday, the day before. It's called Goose something, and the modules in there's like Goose GUI, Goose honk. There's a whole bunch of stuff, and it is top tier. Props to whoever wrote that. That is absolutely hilarious. I will find it and share it.
Please.
That is, I'll tweet it.
That's amazing.
Somebody needs a high five and a beer for that one. But, we will have a bunch of notes and resources, scripts. We'll also have Anton's vector output and kind of convert into a CSV. We'll map atomics, but we'll also have the scripts that Mike wrote. So if you want to go more targeted atomic testing versus running a script that kind of emulates very closely to what the report does, we'll have all that stuff in our repos. as well as, of course, again, the references for the mandate report, and then a variation on the DEFA report, where you see some kind of overlaps in TTPs, which is also, again, a good variation of not just focusing on one report, but getting variations of it from different people's perspectives and what they saw, because that's always important to make sure that you're having good coverage and potentially not missing something interesting. But yeah, thank you everybody for coming in and tuning out. And again, Nas, thank you so much for spending your Friday evening with us, and appreciate your insights and aspects.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
See y'all later.
Toodles, y'all.
Yep.
Cheers.